Hey guys, we are here today with Justin Meiser and Breakaway Performance, and obviously my name's Travis DeLeo, and I'm with TD Soccer Academy. So we are partnering up here. We want to combine our skills, our knowledge in physical therapy, exercise physiology, and our experience working with athletes of different levels, different sports, and add some value to the training that parents need to know more about, and of course the players need to know and how to train and start training. So Justin's here. He's going to introduce himself and give a little bit of his background, and 3 minutes or less, and then we'll jump right into it. So here you go, Justin. Thank you.
All right, so my name is Justin, obviously. I'm a physical therapist. I graduated from St. Francis, where I got my doctoral degree, and I went to IUP for my undergrad. Originally from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. It's out in like the Harrisburg area, sort of. I've always been involved in sports, enjoy fitness, everything like that. So I've always kind of seen me wanting to go deeper with my profession than maybe what people typically think of physical therapy. Being with post-op patients and elderly patients, there's a huge gap and a huge need in between all of that. Such as like, what does an athlete do whenever they are done with rehab and maybe trying to get back to sport? There's a huge gap there with what insurance allows and what insurance approves, and sometimes even what the doctors recommend. So a big part of why I started Breakaway Performance was to not only kind of break away from the insurance model, but just provide a unique service to athletes and adults and just really anybody that has bigger goals with their fitness. And just
yeah, no, I like it. That's good stuff. You have anything else to add?
Not really. I think
good to go. All right. So our goal is to educate youth soccer parents and players on topics that can enhance performance, reduce injuries. That's the goal. Stay on the field and do your best while you're on it, and recover fast. What we're going to do is sometimes we'll use empirical data, other times we'll use our experience to explain the what and the why. Each one of these videos, which we want to bring them to you frequently, routinely, is to focus on one topic. And that way you have at least one takeaway. It's going to be short videos, but we want you to have something to take away from it and apply immediately. And so it's going to be one topic at a time. Today's topic is focused on the influence of strength training for youth athletes, specifically youth soccer players. So this is going to just be a question answer for Justin. We both obviously see a huge need for base strength training routinely for soccer players. But my question to Justin is, why is it important to him, and how does it rank in terms of importance with all these different training philosophies and regimens that are out there?
Yeah, so I think strength training it should be near the top of the list as far as priorities for parents or athletes, because you can have all the skill in the world, but if you don't have the physical ability, there's always kind of going to be a ceiling as far as how far you can go. If you don't have a good core, a good foundation, it's going to be hard to apply some of the higher level skills. So I think the value in strength training with younger kids, aside from just teaching them proper movement and optimizing their movement, you just create a solid foundation, which allows them to have an easier time to learn the skills.
I like it. So it obviously ranks high in importance. Is there anything that you do prior to obviously starting the strength training program in terms of evaluation? I think it's important to talk about that, because before jumping in, which a lot of people see stuff on YouTube and they just want to jump right in and say, oh, that looks cool, or that's new. What's your thought on the evaluation process?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Every athlete that I work out with, we start with just like a basic, a little bit more than a screen, not necessarily a really in-depth evaluation, but enough to at least come up with an organized plan for them. You don't want to start working with the kid and then you're realizing that they're weak in this area or weak in that area, and that's why they're struggling with a certain task. You kind of want to have a plan in mind, at least to get them started. And then, of course, you're always going to be modifying things. But that's something that not everybody does a good job at doing, is kind of getting a baseline of where the athlete is. And I don't know how you're supposed to work on something if you don't know what you're working on. So that's why a pretty crucial part, in my opinion, is doing the evaluation and seeing what they need to work on and developing a plan around them. Because especially with kids, I mean, they're all at different stages of development and different understandings of movement in their body, and they're all really just trying to learn how to move the best that they can. So they don't need a cookie cutter program.
I think that's a good point, is that there's so many things that you could do specifically for athletes as they go on, right?
Yeah.
But you don't really necessarily, at least in my experience, it wasn't so much about like what's new, what's exciting. It's a lot of the boring stuff. And the same thing was with soccer drills. It's even in the drills that I run, the skills that I teach, they have to learn what to do with their body first. So I think if they can get into a sports performance program and develop a base of strength, and like you said, how to move, I think that's the most critical thing, is like learn how your body moves. Because if you step back and watch a lot of players, a lot of athletes, they don't know how to use their body, because it's constantly changing about every 3 months, depending on their age and everything. But I think that the evaluation process is super important. We'll dive into that more in another episode. But so we'll stay focused on the strength training aspect. But the age of strength training, do you have a specific age that makes sense to start? There's a lot of, I feel like, myths out there about what age they should start lifting, or what age they should start moving a certain way. I just want to get your thoughts on that and what you typically do.
Yes, I mean, it obviously depends. Like, I would say it more so depends on the kid's maturity. Like, you could have a 9-year-old that's very mature, very coachable, and they pick stuff up right away and they're able to lift weights, with good form. That's kind of like my starting point. If they can't do a squat with good technique without weight, it doesn't make any sense to add weight. And same thing if you're, having them do box jumps or anything. Like, if they don't have the fundamentals of the movement down, then you can't start adding a load to it.
Do you often see that with others in the field? I know it's one of my frustrations, especially on YouTube.
Yeah, like kind of putting the cart in front of the horse, where they're, trying to do the advanced stuff because they saw it on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and the athlete's not necessarily ready for that. So just because it's hard doesn't always mean you should do it right away. It's like, to me, I prioritize technique over everything. So I mean, if I was working with, say, a 16-year-old kid and they wanted to squat 225 pounds, but their squat with 135 pounds looked horrendous, I mean, I would not let them do it. And really, that's just a lot of the development that I try to encourage the kids to do, is make sure you're doing stuff with proper form and get the basics down. Kind of like you said, all the boring stuff that, it doesn't seem like you're doing anything, but you're actually doing a lot.
Yeah.
And then, kind of building off of that in a organized manner.
No, I think that makes sense. And it's similar to what I do in soccer, the foundation, and that goes with anything, but I preach a lot of patience. Like, when you're learning something new, you have to be patient with the development process. It doesn't happen overnight. And I'm speaking to parents, and we're both parents, so we both can speak to this, that we all want our kids to be successful overnight. It just doesn't work that way, especially, from a physical standpoint. So it's important to manage expectations and to trust the process when it comes to strength training, because if you want to touch on the muscle growth phase and the neurological phase, I mean, we can get into that, but typically, how long does it take for you to see results for someone who, let's just say, doesn't know how to, maybe one example of, you don't have to name the kid, but one example of they didn't know how to walk or didn't know how to run, and, a week later, a month later, a year later, they're able to do what they can do through the strength training.
Yeah, well, and honestly, again, I mean, it kind of depends on the athlete and where they're at as far as their understanding and what you're working on. But I mean, I've seen improvement in people almost immediately to where it takes like a month or so. It kind of depends what you're working on, how complicated of a task it is. But I find, like, especially with like balance stuff and core exercise, that seems like just in general people can kind of pick that up faster, because it's not as long of a process to gain those skills that it's like to gain muscle. Like that takes, you know, 2 to 3 weeks till you're truly like gaining muscle fibers, whereas a lot of times more of the like neuromuscular connection with the balance and stuff like that, a lot of that is just, you know, you have to learn how to do it. So I personally feel that picks up a lot quicker.
The neurological component.
Yeah, like balance type stuff. Like, it just seems like, I mean, I'll see it within within just one day, like from the first set to the third set, you can see improvement with that. And I think it's just like, if you've never done it, then of course you're going to be bad at it, but you kind of pick it up really quickly, because otherwise you're going to fall, and then your body's like, oh, that's how I stand on one leg, or that's how I do a single leg deadlift. And so it just all depends on what you're doing. With running, it might take a little bit longer, because maybe they're fatiguing, and that's why they're starting to run with, you know, different deviations in their gait. Like if their hip abductors and stuff are getting tired, or their core is getting tired. I mean, I know, I watch my daughter play soccer, and you can tell, like, when the kids are tired. It's very obvious.
Yes.
And you don't have to be a physical therapist or really anything like that to see it. Like, you can tell when it's like, all right, they've had enough.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with training sessions and all of that stuff. Like, they might tell you that they're not tired, but they don't have to, because their body language tells you.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And I think for parents and coaches, you know, because if coaches are listening to this, you know, we hope that you take that into consideration, because everyone learns different and everyone communicates differently. You know, me teaching soccer, you know, Justin coaching, and, you know, the performance of these kids, everybody responds differently and at different times. So just because your kid may not be getting it right away doesn't mean that they're any less of an athlete. It's just a different learning process. And I think we both can speak to that in our experiences, that everyone learns at a different rate. You know, just to kind of close out here, you know, we talked a lot about the importance of strength training, the evaluation process before the strength training, how that's the base, that should be a big starting point. The neurological component, where they're going to learn things faster, where, like you said, balancing you know, your body learns how to balance quickly, or else you're going to fall. So it's a quicker response, a quicker learning rate. The muscle fibers take, you know, a little bit longer to grow. Unfortunately, it doesn't take that long for the muscles to shrink. But I think that those are 2 or 3 important points to take away. But if I'm a parent on the other end of this, I'm thinking, all right, what does my kid need to do? Where should we start? And so we'll kind of close out on that, so they have, you know, an actionable plan with this topic going forward in terms of strength. So we talked about evaluation. Do you want to touch a little bit about specifics of that briefly, and then maybe like 2 or 3 things that you feel like are the most important for a kid to start, even if it's at home, if they don't want to come to a place like Breakaway Performance, which I just want to say, you know, I grew up in a sports performance facility, and it's super, super important if you have any aspirations of playing in travel soccer, or high school soccer, college, and of course, you know, for those that can reach professional, it's not even an extra thing like a bonus. It's like a requirement now. It's just a given that you need to be, you know, a top performing athlete, and then you can hone in your skills. So I just wanted to touch on that, but if you want to go into that, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, the number one thing for, you know, kids to work on at home is start making them do planks. Like, if there's one exercise that every kid could benefit from, it's doing a plank and building up their core control. Because a lot of the movement problems I see with kids, just kind of spectating, you can always tell the ones that have a weak core. They're kind of like flopping around like Gumby when they run. Like, there's no
And we can all think of that one kid.
Yeah, and it's also kind of like, because this is relatively new to me as far as working with kids in this manner, so it's kind of, I'm still learning different things as well. But the one thing I've seen is just helping kids get a stronger core. I mean, they come in, they're running better, they're pitching better, and And I think that's probably like the number one thing. And you don't need to pay for somebody to come tell you how to do a plank. Like
Right.
There's videos on YouTube where you can see how to do it if you don't know how to do a plank. And,
right.
Just, I mean, shoot for a minute or two a day, you know, like a couple reps. And I feel like that's probably the number one thing that a parent could do without actually coming to a facility. And another thing too, like you don't have to go forever necessarily. Like
yeah.
Sometimes just coming for like a month or so and
just to
get
get
really
started,
building that foundation, and then maybe circling back where you're coming like once a month or something like that. Like that's kind of how I envision it going for some kids. Not that there's anything wrong with doing more than that.
Yeah.
Sometimes people just need the accountability of having somebody there telling them what to do. But that's how I work with a lot of people, where it's maybe a lot more in person at first, but then the kid's gonna want to do it on their own too. They kind of have to want it.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So like that's my goal for working with athletes. Get them to where they can almost kind of do it themselves, but maybe you're just modifying it. Like I've already seen with some of the kids I've worked with for a little bit longer of a time frame where you almost have to like circle back to the basics every now and then.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because I mean they're growing. Like this particular kid, I feel like he's grown a couple inches, and it's like they forget how to move now because now everything's a different length. The levers are different for their muscles, and you kind of have to like circle back, and then it's almost like you just hit Control Alt Delete and reset the body, and now they're back to how they were doing it. You just keep building off of that. So, and again, that's all stuff that I'm kind of like learning as I go.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome to admit that, because I'm the same. I don't claim to know everything, and I'm constantly learning. Like that's why, like this is a learning experience for me, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, is to make the players I work, like if starting tonight, my lesson tonight, we're going to start doing planks at the end of every lesson. It's just going to be a group thing where we all get better, and if nothing else, it inspires them to go home and say, like, now we have a talking point, like here's why, and by the way, a physical therapist and sports performance coach, this is one of the recommendations. I think like don't overcomplicate it. You don't have to go and have a periodized program of macro cycles when the kid is 8, 9, 10 years old, or even 11, 12. Like just get the shoes on and start doing something. Like go for a run, do some squats, do the plank. But we definitely want to talk about the specific things like you mentioned with the plank and why that is. So I think if people know the why, they're more inclined to pull through and do it. So we'll pick back up again, because strength training is super important. It's the base of everything else. You can't be super powerful without a base of strength, and you certainly can't move efficiently without that. So thanks, Justin. This was an awesome first episode. I learned a lot. I hope you guys learned a lot, and we'll let Justin say goodbye, and we'll certainly put his contact information up. If you guys are interested in evaluation, he's going to be doing those, so we'll have a way for you to reach out to him. So I'm excited. We're going to do a lot of these, and hopefully you got something from it. So
thanks for listening, and I hope there's a lot more that we can dive into and continue to provide meaningful content to everybody.
Yes, sir. All right. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next one.